Do you remember the hum of a CRT monitor or the clack of a keyboard? It felt like typing on a typewriter. Well, if you do, today we're traveling back to the 70s and 80s to count down the top 10 personal computers. I remember with the first ones, it was just cool that you could type letters on the screen. So we had to set up a criteria for the top 10. We couldn't just go by price because it varied a lot. And while there was some correlation between cost and units sold, it wasn't always the case. So we went with units sold because we felt that was way more fair across the board. Hopefully that works for you too. If not, leave us a comment. Maybe we can redo this video in the future with a different criteria for the top 10. Either way, there's no doubt they changed us and the world forever. They were the machines that shaped our childhoods, sparked creativity, and maybe even inspired a few careers. I thought about it for a second, but it wasn't required to be a computer scientist to mess with computers, even the first ones. Today we're going to be counting down the top 10 PCs of the 70s and 80s. The very first cutting-edge, what is this in my house machine? Now, I'm sure a few of you had these. If you did, please tell us about them. I want to know what you had. I had the Commodore 64, the old 1541 drive, and the tape drive TRS-80 64K. Be sure and share yours in the comment. Let's go. You're watching GenX Flashback. So let's kick off the countdown with kind of a clunky one. Now this is more like what we found in school, although the TRS-80 dual disc drive that I'm showing here was popular too. I'll talk about it later. This is the IBM PC 5150, not 5150 like Van Halen, Van Hagar. This was just a computer, and it was a blueprint to the modern PC. IBM rolled this out in 1981, and they meant business, literally. It was meant for professionals, and it was priced that way too. I don't know of anybody that had one in their home. It was $1,565, which would be like $5,200 today. Now here's what made it special. IBM designed it with an open architecture, and what that meant was third-party companies could make compatible hardware or software. The decision single-handedly created a PC clone market. You could upgrade the memory, add disk drives, or even install math coprocessors if you needed some serious number crunching power. And even though it was fairly impressive for a computer like this and the price, it only sold about 750,000 units, which puts it at the bottom of our list. Moving on to number 9, we're looking at the Sinclair ZX80 and ZX81, and also in the United States known as the Timex Sinclair 1000, and they were sold and marketed between 1980 and 1982. Now, the Sinclair ZX80 or 81 and Timex Sinclair 1000, they were a trio of budget computers that made home computing possible for the average person. Clive Sinclair, or if you can guess, that's the guy it was named after, decided he wanted to be kind of a Henry Ford with computers. He wanted one in everyone's home. So the focus wasn't on quality, and it wasn't on compatibility or expandability. It was all about how cheap you could make a computer. It had its own specific keyboard or keystroke to limit the number of keys that were used. Add to that it was a membrane keyboard that was very hard to press and not ergonomic at all. Yet they sold a lot of them, 1.5 million units worldwide. That's still a lot considering what little this computer could do. So here was my very first computer, at least the first one that I remember. The TRS-80 Model 1, which came out in 1977. Some people remember the TRS-80, some people remember Radio Shack. I wish Radio Shack would come back. They carried so many things that no one else did, and it's a shame they're gone. It had some stiff competition back then with the Apple II and the Commodore PET or PET. A lot of people called it the Trash 80 because it was the least of the three options out there. The TRS-80 relied on a cassette tape data storage setup. It looked like this. I had this setup and this connector. When you needed to save something, it would send signals like what you were used to, similar to a fax machine. Love it or hate it, it sold a lot of units, 2.4 million to be exact. And a lot of people like myself learned how to program BASIC on this machine. Up next is another heavy hitter at number 7, the Commodore VIC-20. This was 1980. The VIC-20 was the first to sell over 1 million units. Jack Tramiel, who was head of Commodore at the time, wanted to make it accessible and have a lot more function with a lower price. He came in around $299, which would be about $1,000 today. but it was marketed as the first friendly computer. I remember it as having really good color, but the Commodore kind of liked that blue and gray screen, and it even had the button where you could hit it and type in symbols. That was kind of cool too. It had easy to use cartridges and did something that the other ones didn't. It adapted the Atari controller, the 2600 controller, as its mainstay for gaming. That kind of proved out to be a brilliant move because those things were everywhere. Lots of third-party manufacturers were making these and making them cheap, so you could pick them up about anywhere. How many did it sell? 2.5 million units. Okay, number 6 is the Texas Instruments or TI-99-994A. It's a pretty cool design. If a DeLorean could be a computer, that's kind of what it looked like. Had a cartridge slot right on top, it had a place for add-ons in the back where you can just plug them in. But believe it or not, it was one of the biggest company failures for Texas Instruments. Now, when the original TI-99 was launched, somebody in the marketing department was completely out of step with what was going on with personal computers. The original price of this thing was over $1,000. Now, that didn't sell, and they had already made thousands of them. They had warehouses full of these things, and they were not moving. They almost couldn't give them away. So how'd they fix that? Well, a little bit of trickery is what they did. They relabeled the thing, even though they didn't really change it. It went from the TI-99 to the TI-99 4A. Now, when they put that out, they charged $525 for it, which was still a non-starter. At that price point, you could get a lot more computer from anyone. So as time went on and these sat in stores and didn't move, they kept having to lower the price. It went from $525 to $399, went to $199, then it finally went to $99. When they still weren't moving at that price, they were offered at around $60 to $70. Everyone thus thought that was a good deal because they sold 2.5 million of these. They cleared out all their warehouses, but they didn't build any more. And if you bought it, you better not break it because they never made replacement parts for these units. It didn't do a lot, but it sure was cool looking. Number 5 is a bit quirky. It's the Amstrad CPC series, and that came out in 1984. It was a real hit in Europe, and it had an all-in-one design. Everything, as you can see here, was built into this machine, including the data storage, which was a tape deck, but it was all a part of the same case. And overall, it was pretty middle of the road. It did gaming, and it also did word processing, music composition, and a little bit more. Now, the price in England was around £359, which today would be about $1,230. But people must have really liked that all-in-one package because they sold over 3 million units. All right, number 4 brings a really big gaming console name into the fray. Atari, the 8-bit family. Now, these were anywhere from 1979 all the way up to 1992. For a very long time, Atari controlled everything with the 2600, or most prolific gaming system until the NES. But they didn't want to get left behind in the home computer market. So they came up with what was called the Atari 400 and the Atari 800. Now, these were pretty simple computers. They cost around $550, which, adjusted for inflation, that's a stout $2,100 today. And the 800 was priced even higher. It was $1,000, which would have been $3,800 today. As far as gaming went, neither was as good as the NES. Even with the high prices, the hype helped it get to 4 million units.
Hey guys, how about a deal? The car tonight for Atari basketball.
No. In fact, there's no end to your possibilities.
You remember Clive Sinclair, the one that made the ZX computers? Well, at number 3, he's back again with the ZX Spectrum. Launched in 1982, it was the first one to bring color gaming from a computer. As sold to the masses, mainly in the UK and in Europe, and pretty much was built in the same case as the ZX80 and 81. But it had an expanded memory, and they'd really upgraded the processor in this one. You could pick one up for about 125 British pounds, which was closer to about $170 US. Today it'd be $420, which is not a bad deal for a computer that can game also, especially when gaming was a pretty new thing. Total units sold on this one, 5 million. At number 2, a real powerhouse came on the scene. In 1977, Apple launched the II series. and it was a masterpiece of engineering by the two Steves, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. This thing was expandable friendly and one of the first computers to offer true color graphics. Now, obviously there was a catch. It was $1,298. That's like $6,100 today. The thing wasn't cheap, but it was worth every penny for the 6 million people who bought one. Its Disk 2 floppy drive was a game changer also. It made it a lot easier to store data on. A friend of mine had one of these. We used to go over to his house and play games on it. And when you think about it, this was the one that put Apple on the map. Did any of you have an Apple II? Let me know. Well, finally we hit the #1 selling computer of the 70s and 80s. And I think you know who it is since I've left them out for so long. The Commodore 64. It was priced almost at $600, which would have been about $1,700 today. But it became the single best-selling computer of all time. I mean, that record still stands today. Why in the world was it so popular? Well, it's because they kept upgrading this thing as it went. You had a full-on disk drive. Granted, it was a 5 1/4 floppy. Take a look at this thing. Commodore had a lot of resources to go along with these machines. A full library of software, games, you just name it, peripherals, printers, light pens. There's a lot of stuff that went along with this. They packaged it well, and they obviously won with it. Total units sold? 17 million. Now, I've got a quick question for you GenX computer people. When you were using the 5 1/4, you were only supposed to use the top side, the up side of this disk. But did you know there was a trick where you could flip it over, grab a standard hole punch, and clip the other side, and you'll be able to format the back side of that disk too? Give me a shout out if you did this yourself. Saved a lot of money on disks. Well, from the Commodore 64 all the way back to that 5150 IBM PC, they were slow, they didn't do much, but they were milestones. They were our first steps into the digital age. And I think you gotta admit it shaped our entire future. Now, I literally know we missed a lot of computers that were on everybody else's list, mainly because we were just looking at the top 10 sellers. But if you'd like another video on computers that are made up of the ones that are kind of fan favorite, then let us know. And just pass us a note and we'll be glad to add that to the list. Whether you are a Gen Xer or a Gen Xer at heart, we want to give you what you want to hear about. It's our nostalgic road to travel, right? Thanks for watching. We'd love to have you as a part of our gang. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, that'd be great. I want you to have a great day, and I want to thank you for being here. God bless.